I, at the age of 14, took a deep fascination with BioShock Infinite, mainly due to its gorgeous graphics and interesting storyline. I got my first PlayStation at age 20 when my husband gifted it to me for Christmas, so I was able to play Infinite to my heart's content. However, my opinion about the game has changed as I have aged, shifting further to the left and developing a more sophisticated intersectional feminist view. This greatly impacted how I saw BioShock Infinite, especially its female characters and characters of colour. I deeply care about how women in video games are represented, especially since watching Anita Sarkeesian's eye-opening video essay series of Women in Video Games. I have seen many of the videos on YouTube about BioShock Infinite, nearly all of them critical of the gameplay and the storyline. I agree overwhelmingly with the negative critiques about how the storyline handled race, class struggle, and the so-called socialist revolution. However, I find that most of the video creators are men and are overwhelmingly positive of the characterization of Elizabeth. The game's creators wrote her so that the presumed straight male player finds Elizabeth adorable, but playing as a woman leaves me feeling differently about her character. Another character whose role suffered due to substandard writing is Daisy Fitzroy. While her revolutionary role is essential to the story, the fact that she is the only black person and the only one of 3 women with scripted lines has an impact on how we view her in the game. Most critics agree that her story ended egregiously, and I will touch upon why her death in particular angered me the most in this game. In this essay, I will focus on both of these characters and criticize how they are presented as women throughout the game. It is important to remember that video games are a form of media, and media has the power to change the way we think about a group of people. To state otherwise is to engage in a dangerous fallacy that limits one's own ability to think critically about the world that impacts all of us. I will assume that viewers of this video have either played the game or have watched playthroughs online. I will not focus on the Burial at Sea DLC, instead I will focus solely on the main game. This is because the DLC undoes a lot of what the original game was saying, and many fans agree that it is not canon. We learn nearly everything about Elizabeth's life from the ground floor of her siphon/tower, where she is holed up similarly to Rapunzel or Sleeping Beauty, while we play as a rough, morally questionable former Pinkerton, who is her gruff knight in shining armour. The tower functions as a makeshift laboratory where her entire life is dissected for our observation. She is not given a voice, and we do not need to hear her speak, only to examine the documents scattered around the lab and listen to audio diaries about her. Her existence is reduced to an experiment, analysed and explained by others, rather than allowing her to tell her own story. She, as a woman, is probed and prodded by male scientists or doctors. In the real world, women constantly face predators like Robert Haddon and Z. Alan Sheng, to name 2 particularly egregious cases. Yet BioShock reduces this reality to a spectacle for the presumed male player. While stories sometimes depict violence against women to drive plot, whether to justify revenge or explain a character's motivations, such portrayals often sideline women's experiences, framing them as mere catalysts for a male-driven narrative. A more responsible approach to this would be to centre the survivor's perspective, allowing players to engage with the game as the wounded party rather than a passive witness to yet another instance of women's suffering being used as background noise. It is not a valid argument to claim that women need to be brutalised for the sake of realism. In reality, this kind of portrayal does little to change audiences. Instead, it reinforces existing biases. Most male players are more likely to empathise with the scientist than with Elizabeth, as the game presents her suffering as just another narrative device. Rather than provoking critical thought, repeated depictions of violence against women only serve to desensitise male audiences to their suffering. These so-called scientists even take nude photos of her without her knowledge or consent, reducing her to an object of study and exploitation. In doing so, the game forces the player into the role of a voyeur, complicit in her violation. While the writers may have intended this to highlight the scientist's depravity, they also included it knowing the kind of titillation this imagery provokes in the presumed straight male player. This deliberate framing exposes a deeper issue. Her suffering is not just depicted, but commodified for the audience's gaze. This is meant to be sexy. In a porn-saturated society, how could it be anything else? These images are tame compared to what men can easily find of women online today. But that doesn't make them any less insidious. Instead of fully acknowledging the violation, the game downplays it. Booker merely remarks, "They have been watching her." No, Booker, they haven't just been watching her. They have bugged her living quarters, stripped her of her privacy, and violated her basic human rights. Nearly every aspect of her life has been invaded, yet the game treats this as little more than an unsettling detail, rather than a profound atrocity that it is. None of this is openly criticised in the game for what it is, which is misogyny. We learn that we are meant to find Elizabeth extremely powerful, and yet she cannot escape without our help. Her powers are ironically too much for her sweet little hands to handle. The scientists have to quote-unquote keep her under control. The perfect damsel in distress. I cannot think of a male character in any other form of media that has been so degraded as Elizabeth has. If there are any, I would genuinely like to hear it in the comments. What is being done to her is because she is a woman. Her femaleness is being scrutinised under the guise of science. They even record when her menarche, or period, started, which is then marked with big bold writing that the facility is unsafe. This is period shaming, and they are linking her first period with her being out of control. It feels like a high school boy wrote this in as a joke. Back in the real world, in 2019, a Kenyan schoolgirl unalived herself after allegedly being period shamed by a teacher. She started her period in class and did not have a pad. Her teacher called her dirty. A 2014 UNESCO report found that 1 in 10 girls miss schooling during menstruation, meaning they miss around 20% of their schooling each year. While there have been male characters that are held somewhere against their will, such as Magneto in X-Men, one does not need to look carefully to see how differently he was treated compared to Elizabeth. It is so obvious. No samples of his hair, nails or blood, no lingering on documents about his bodily functions, and certainly no naked pictures of him for the audience to ogle at. The point is, everything that we experience in media is done so through a point of view. Whose point of view is decided by the creators? It is their opinions and perspectives that we will get to see. If the creator is a misogynist, we will see misogynistic content. If they are racist, we will see racist content. Video games cost millions to make, meaning each decision has been made by a team who decides what we will see and experience. This means that a whole group of people had to sit and discuss whether we will see Elizabeth's nudes and why. This is what complete objectification of a character looks like. It's especially unnerving that she's only 19 years old and incredibly susceptible to manipulation and grooming. After Battleship Bay, Elizabeth becomes a useful tool. She will throw the player ammo, health, and salts in combat. She will unlock doors and even open tears for you. All the while, Booker seems mostly avoidant of the word please and will simply demand of her, and she will always comply. This panders to the presumed straight male player, a cute, feminine AI that does your bidding without any pushback. To return to earlier points, Elizabeth is 19 years old. She has never left her tower and has no friends. We don't even know who her mother is, and neither does she. This reflects a broader pattern in media where women's roles, particularly as mothers, are either erased or rendered insignificant. This absence reinforces a patriarchal narrative in which women's contributions, especially in relation to reproduction and inheritance, are overlooked or deemed unimportant unless they serve the development of male characters, meaning that Elizabeth is in the perfect condition to be groomed and manipulated, especially by a much larger, violent man. Your character does not need to be nice to her. In fact, there are very few touching moments between Elizabeth and Booker. Their interactions are stressed, and she only agrees to be with him because she has no other means of getting away from Colombia, which is odd considering she has the ability to manipulate space-time. I guess the creators really could not let go of that damsel in distress trope. The problem with the damsel in distress trope is that it feeds the male ego, as the player is made out to be the only one who can save her. Only this man is able to help this helpless woman. She is pathetic without him. This trope takes a particularly pernicious turn when she, after helping you find the key code for a lift, asks you to basically end her before letting the songbird take her back. She does not explicitly say to end her, but it is heavily implied by her saying, "Promise me that if it comes to it, you will not let him take me back," while she grabs your male hand and puts your fingers around her throat. What is this scene saying to the presumed straight male player? While this scene can be read as a desperate plea, when you look at the freeze frame, it is overtly sexual. You see your hand around her neck, and when she looks you dead in the eyes, she is telling you to do it. It is now common knowledge that sexual choking has been mainstreamed by pornography. It has become increasingly prevalent in young men's sexual behaviour. A national probability survey in the US found that 21% of women reported having been choked, and 20% of men have reported choking a sexual partner. The study also suggests that adults aged 18 to 29 reported engaging in choking at higher rates than older adults. Another study in the US found that women, as well as men who are intimate with men, are more likely to report their male partners as having dominating behaviors, including choking. Studies have found associations between pornography and these behaviors as statistically significant, meaning there is a direct link between men and boys consuming pornography and engaging in these behaviors. As described by Catherine A. McKinnon, porn is bigoted content that rewards its viewers with an orgasm. This matters because pornography has spilled over into mainstream media, including video games such as BioShock Infinite. In the real world, Women's Aid has reported that on average, 1 woman every 2 weeks is strangled to death by her partner. The creators did not need to include Elizabeth grabbing Booker's hand and closing it around her throat, but they did. One of the most overt ways that the creators of Infinite sexualize Elizabeth is through her change of outfit. In keeping with the Madonna/whore complex, we can now sexualize Elizabeth because she has been quote-unquote bad. She unalives Daisy Fitzroy and scurries away to get changed out of her blood-soaked clothes. She returns to us cutting off her ponytail, wearing a corset with enlarged breast and a minuscule waist. Elizabeth claims this is all they had. I take it to mean all the male creators actually had in mind for her character from the start. A sexy sidekick with big boobs for the presumed straight male player to ogle at, no matter if Elizabeth can breathe or not. This clothing is completely impractical for a woman who has to run and hide from enemies every 5 minutes. The more pressing issue is that bodies like this simply cannot exist in the real world. When both girls and boys are constantly exposed to this body type in mainstream media, they become socialized to expect nearly all women to look this way: massive breasts, small waist, and wider hips. This leads girls to experience body dysmorphia, and in boys a total misunderstanding of what girls and women actually look like. The creators chose to dress her like this. It becomes even more twisted when you realize that she is actually our daughter in the game, as we, the player, are meant to find this titillating. After all, Elizabeth is cut off from all other people. She is here for us to ogle at any moment. My favourite character in Infinite is easily Daisy Fitzroy. She's left-wing, a radical, and an abolitionist. The first time in the game you are introduced to Daisy, it's through a carnival-like gun tutorial minigame at the beginning called Hunt Down the Vox, where you're required to shoot down cutouts of the communist underground group in Colombia who are known as the Vox. In the game, the Vox characters are nearly all coded male except for one, Daisy. She is the only person of colour who has more than 3 lines of dialogue. Most enemies are male. In the minigame, the game gives you more points if you shoot Daisy and rewards you with more money, which most players could argue is a way of criticising Colombia's racism. But the game is literally rewarding you as the player for interacting with this game and shooting the only woman of colour in the main storyline. The criticism argument is debunked when a racist could also play this game and take joy in shooting a person of colour and be rewarded for it. Therefore, the game itself does not overtly criticise racism, it simply is racist. The second mention of Daisy is through the voxophone spoken by Preston E. Downs, a white hitman who was hired to find and unalive Daisy. He makes a rape joke about how he hopes Comstock doesn't want him to stuff and mount her too. With this hunting and rape joke, the creators are attempting to get a laugh or a smirk from the presumed male player. The joke about making a woman into a hunting trophy is hardly new. It takes real-world pain, misogyny, and turns it into a joke. A trouser advert from the 1970s uses the tagline, "After one look at his Mr. Leg slacks, she'll be ready to have him walk all over her." In the photo, a tiger skin rug has the head of a woman, and a man in a suit has his foot on her head. Compiled with the fact that Daisy is black, this joke should have us all questioning what the creators were actually attempting to say here. It is well known that white male slave owners would rape their black slaves, and Daisy was a maid hired by the most powerful white man in Colombia. The point is, a racist could have heard this quote-unquote joke and laughed. We must wonder, how critical is this game when they are catering to racist and sexist people? Later in the game, when Daisy calls you in the lift, her excuse is bizarre for turning on us, just that we may be an imposter or a ghost. This is weak storytelling after all. Booker, at this point in the story, has fought alongside her, and she just gives orders for him to be executed. However, this is the story we're going with. After battling her subordinates, we see that Daisy has Fink's child, who she makes clear she will execute. Elizabeth then sneaks up behind her and kills her with a pair of scissors. The communist Daisy had to be demonized, so the writers made her into an attempted child killer. Contrary to what the game proceeds to tell us twice, Comstock and Fitzroy are not one and the same. One is a communist, the other is a slave-owning, racist, wife-killing, misogynistic barbarian. They may be extremes of one particular social binary, but that does not make them equal in positions. Daisy was a mouthpiece for people who were considered the social underclass, who were starving and homeless. We see this clearly in Shantytown, and to compare her to the elites who are living in Emporia or even near Comstock Centre is disingenuous. This was when I realised that the creators had no intention of making a game with true social critique. To compare right-wing fascists with left-wing revolutionaries is a centrist viewpoint that reinforces the status quo of an unequal society in which we live. The creators chose to make the Vox Populi into our enemies, and they chose to vilify Daisy. This matters because players are influenced by the political opinions of the media they consume. Murdering the only woman of colour with a speaking role in the game was framed as correct, especially at the hands of our innocent feminine sidekick, which reinforces the gender binary. Daisy was too assertive, too domineering, too much like a man. She had to be stopped. The ultimate white male fantasy girl killed the black outspoken woman. It is a glaringly obvious statement about how men believe women should behave and what happens to you if you do not conform. Amalgamated with the fact that she was a person of colour, this is multifaceted bigotry. BioShock Infinite is not an appropriate conduit for social criticism. The game deals with sexism and racism clumsily, and does not criticise either. As I have already stated, just because a game has sexism and racism in it does not mean that it is criticising it. For example, son of a bitch is a term that is used throughout the game. It is a term most people associate with men. But who is actually being insulted by that term? It's his mother. She is being called a gendered slur that degrades her to the position of a female breeding dog. I doubt that any of the straight male players of this game analyse this misogynistic slur for what it is, which shows us how willing we are to consume sexist media without question. Living in a world where Trump is president again and where misogynistic content is pushed in all media, we can see the direct impacts of this kind of media. Infinite's opinion on sexism and race seem tame compared to the extremism that is presented in right-wing media today. We are becoming numb to bigotry that is presented on screen, especially when we live in a porn-saturated society. Porn shows bigotry and turns it into masturbation content, which rewards users with an orgasm. Game consoles reward players with trophies or achievements. Elizabeth and Daisy deserved better. They deserved what was done to them to be shown as the disgusting discrimination that it was. Instead, we had a naive and sexualized 19-year-old girl and a murdered black revolutionary woman. The male players and creators should ask themselves, what does this kind of representation say about women to women? Thank you for watching. I appreciate comments left under this video, and I love video games and hate the patriarchy.